everybody. It's Tracy Brown. And do I need to remind you that you are participating in the Achieving Inclusion Summit 2023, where I am encouraging you to be bold. Be bold as you avoid or recover from fatigue. Be bold as you confront racism. Be bold as you find new ways to measure progress. And all three of those tracks came from questions and comments from clients and from people in social media who were saying these are the things that we're thinking about or we're talking about. It came from conversations with clients I'm currently working with, and it hopefully is resonating. These tracks are resonating with you. I remind you that because we are live streaming, all of the sessions are available to you at any time once they have been completed, because you can go to YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook and you can scroll down and look for previous session. I am really, really, wow, excited's not the word. I am honored. That doesn't quite capture it. I am privileged, all of the good stuff, right? I am feeling really happy about this conversation that we are getting ready to dive into. If you don't know who Dr. Christopher Metzler is, as we might say casually, you better ask somebody. But seriously, Dr. Metzler is an internationally recognized expert on diversity, equity, inclusion. He is an expert in ESG and helping organizations really look at environmental compliance and social engagement and governance. And he's an esteemed law professor. And within the realm of DEI, he is a legendary thought leader and the architect of so many things that have shaped the way that we approach DEI, DEIB, DEIBA, whatever acronyms you are using. The only other thing I'm going to say about Dr. Metzler before bringing him in is that without the permission of his parents, and without his permission, I am changing his middle initial from Christopher J. Metzler to Christopher I. Metzler, because clearly, he is incredible. He is irrepressible. He is inspiring. And more than anything, he is innovative. So I want to bring into the room Dr. Christopher I. Metzler.
Well, Tracy, thank you so much. And I do appreciate that change. I think I'm going to go down to the courthouse on Monday. That's that be changed. It's such a pleasure to be with you. And for all the folks, the one thing that you will realize about me during our time together, I don't hold back. So whatever it is I have to say, I'm going to say it. Let the chips fall where they may, because I think too many of us are just holding back for fear of whatever. And the other thing I would say to folks is remember, your destiny is in your hands. If you think that your destiny is in the hand of an organization, if you were to be incapacitated today, they would step over you and say, "Who's next?" So there we go.
Absolutely. So I, of course, know your background, and many people do, but I also know there are some people who are tuning in or who are
Sure.
watching the recording who don't know about you. So give us about 2 minutes of what's important for people to know about you for context
Yes.
conversation.
So, first of all, I created the first diversity certification program in the country. For those of you who are familiar with the Cornell diversity certification, that's all my work. I created that from the very beginning. And I will say, when I created it, I got extreme pushback internally and externally. Now everyone is rushing to certification. From Cornell, went to Georgetown, created their master's in HR, their certificate in diversity, and managed 7 other master's degrees, including sports management. And I will also say that as a result of that, Qatar 2022, we were a consultant on training and development for the World Cup. I've taught at a number of law schools and institutions, went to law school at both Columbia and Oxford University in the UK, and have been working for quite a while to really just to get organization to understand diversity is not a zero sum game. I'm also trying to get diversity professionals to stop saying their job is to work themselves out of a job.
Woo,
It's
woo, woo, woo.
exhausting when you say that. Do you ever hear the CFO saying that? Your job should be perhaps to work yourself into another C suite position. But to suggest that you want to work yourself out of a job sounds good, is politically nice. However, it's unrealistic. And so those are just some of the things I would say.
Yes, yes. For years, I every time I hear someone say, "Oh, it's to work myself out of a job," or "This department won't be needed," and I just cringe. And as you said, we don't say that about quality. We don't
No,
say that about safety. We
no,
don't say that about any other function that is integral to building the culture and creating success internally and externally. So
correct.
you and I are definitely on the same page about that.
Yeah,
So,
and the other thing I would say is there was all this conversation about the business case for diversity. Stop saying that, okay? Because and here's the reason I say that. If we know anything about diversity, what we understand, the business case originally came out because Roosevelt Thomas and others were trying to push back against some attacks on diversity. But the business case is not the question. It is a value proposition. What is the value to the organization in terms of people, in terms of customers, in terms of product, in terms of innovation, and how do we measure that? Simply counting the number of people you have, those are not measures. Those are lazy quotas, period.
all right, so let's jump from there
Yes.
to the next rung of the ladder. So you're right. I remember when you were creating the certification program at Cornell, there was a lot of pushback, to use
Oh,
your
yeah.
word. There were a lot of people who were confused about why that was needed.
Hmm.
But since then, beside that becoming kind of the gold standard in
Yeah.
the profession, you've gone on to not only create additional certification programs, but you have advised hundreds or
Oh, yeah.
dozens if not hundreds of organizations. So when establishing this whole idea of you're a certified professional, what key lessons have you learned or do you share with people about measuring progress? Because if we're in
Yeah.
business, there are things we need to measure.
Oh, absolutely. First point of measure is where does the head of diversity sit? If what they tell me is the head of diversity sits in HR, Well, this will never work. Because essentially, what you're doing is you're asking from a people perspective, the head of diversity to say, well, their boss is not doing what they're supposed to, which is why we are where we are from a people standpoint. Number one. Number two, other business. This is, you have to understand to be certified, you need to understand the business you're in, which means you need to understand the product and services you deliver. You need to understand your customers. You need to understand your customer needs. You need to understand supplier diversity. This notion that diversity is just an HR function is not only tired, it is simply ineffective. So that's number one. Where does the position sit? Number two, what is the budget of the person who is doing this? Do they have adequate staffing? Number three, what are your measures? Your measures have to be both quantitative, that is hard numbers, and qualitative, that is focus groups, etc. So that's the other aspect of it. Return on investment. You know, people keep saying diversity is a cost center. Well, you should be making it into a profit center in the sense that you are helping to retain the best talent. You are buying from diverse suppliers who, by the way, when you buy from diverse suppliers, you want them to be successful because you want them to turn around and buy from your organization. Your customers need to understand the value of diversity, meaning that they need to understand that you are concerned about them and what their needs are, which means you have to know your customers. You have to look at issues of innovation. You have to be able to communicate from a marketing messaging standpoint. All of these things are critical from a metrics standpoint. This is no longer, let's just check the box and see. Someone said to me, I mean, I've advised, as you indicated, thousands of companies. Someone said to me the other day, well, how many do I need? How many of what? I mean, what do you mean? Or the person who says, okay, so I'm having difficulty because if I met a black woman in a wheelchair who was injured in the Iraq war, what do I call her? Well, you start off with her name. And this whole rush to labels, what do I call people? It's not about how what you call people. It's about how you treat them in the workplace. I mean, these are the things that I think, and currently, if you look at certification programs across the country, they don't touch on these issues at all. The competencies model, I wrote the first piece on competencies of a diversity professional, and it's still that hasn't, broken through. 2013, I wrote a piece on the 10 reasons why diversity efforts fail. Some of that's no longer true. Most of it, unfortunately, is. So I just published a part one of a LinkedIn piece on the 10 reasons why organizations are failing diversity professionals. And I think that is really the focus.
Mhm. So we're going to talk about that article in just a minute.
Sure.
But I want to, earlier this week in the summit, um, there's a model that I use a lot that is about linking your diversity inclusion initiative to the bottom line. But
Yeah.
the it's some of what you were saying, that if you don't understand how the business works
Yeah.
and you're just doing a DEI initiative focused on just making people feel good
Yeah.
or who you're hiring, then you're missing all these ways to impact the return on investment, to
Correct.
increase revenue, to decrease expenses. And
Yeah.
if you can't link what you're doing to those kind of metrics, then no wonder you can't measure your progress.
Well, and that's absolutely true. And you look at it in the context of police departments and police brutality. Uh, how much money are citizens willing to spend in tax dollars to pay out billions of dollars in settlements rather than correct the systemic and endemic issues in police departments? You got to ask yourself that that question. And so, but the focus is when we're talking about that, we're attacking the police. We're not attacking the police. People believe that fundamentally uh, police are necessary, but I also need to feel safe. And serve and protect should be what we're talking about.
Yes, we're in total agreement. And of course, that's just lucky for me because you're brilliant and you're the genius here.
I don't know about that.
And I'm feeling like, oh, we're in alignment. I must be doing something right. So yes, let's talk about this research and this thinking that you're doing around the role of chief diversity officers and how organizations are either positioning or handcuffing the CDOs.
Mm-hmm, hmm. And I think, for most organizations, I start off with this premise. I hear from organizations diversity is the right thing to do. Okay, well, if it was, why haven't you done it by now? Number one. Number two, this is not about a feel good proposition. And if you're going to bring in a chief diversity officer, they're going to sit in the C suite, which is where they should sit. They should go through no different onboarding than any of the other C suite members in the organization, period. And so, as a result of that, they get to learn the business. They get to read balance sheets. They have to understand balance sheets. They have to understand the cost of turnover. They have to understand the cost of losing government contracts because they don't represent a diverse supply diversity chain. All of these things they have to understand. Unfortunately, in most organizations, and this is for profit, nonprofit, uh, private, non across the board, they don't understand that, in fact, these are the things that you need to be able to do. So, in addition to which, you organizations also have to provide a sufficient investment in diversity. Doing diversity, equity, and inclusion right means that the organization saves money in terms of litigation costs, but also in terms of employee well being, in terms of employee satisfaction, employee retention. And by the way, the question of psychological safety, I don't think organizations are taking that seriously enough. When someone comes to work, do they feel like they're going to be fired at any point? The person who is supervising them, what is that interaction like? Are those interactions simply a half an hour Zoom call every week? And in some cases, the supervisor not showing up for that call. Is that what it is? So all of those things need to be taken care of. Otherwise, you might as well just not have diversity at all.
Yeah, I have worked with some clients where I have challenged them around really elevating their
Yeah,
perspective of
yeah,
what it can be. And you mentioned some of those internal factors which are so critical for a chief diversity officer to know and to be clear about. But there are also, and it's not a but because
yeah.
you've already said it, that and
And
it's also so critical to understand the business. So
Yes.
you can't operate simply out of fear
Correct.
of liability. You need to be bringing something to the table that translates into, oh, new product development,
Yes.
innovations in service to our customers and to our to the community we serve, that translates into reputation and relationships as well as revenue.
Correct. And that external piece, the chief diversity officer needs to spend time in the community, understanding who the customers are, what can be done, what are the better products and services that we can provide. And like I tell people all the time, someone said to me, well, you know, a lot of diversity, people would not have been hired if they were not black. First of all, diversity doesn't mean black. Let's just stop all with all that. That's number one. Number two, if you're going to hire me because I bring my blackness, well, you can keep that job because it's not going to work out. And I think these still stereotypical attitudes and behaviors uh, really need to be discussed and gotten past. And I think, we don't exclude the naysayers and the negative people. What we want to do is to figure out, why is this such a problem and what can we do collectively to solve it? But I just think people don't want to do that. They'd rather stay in polar opposite positions because it gives them a sense of power. It gives them a sense of something to hold on to, even though it's not true.
And it is a distraction. It's like, well, we
Precisely.
can do these other things over here,
Right.
but we've got you distracted by focusing on this little bitty tiny
Slightly.
part of the
Yeah.
total.
Yes. Correct.
Anything, is there anything else that's coming up as you continue to really look at organizations and the way they position or treat the chief diversity officer role?
Well, there is still this notion that the chief diversity officer is really neither chief or officer, that they are in a position that will help attract and retain so called women and minorities. And again, minorities, one of those words, I am not minor to anything or to anyone. So stop. Just stop it. There's certain terms and certain phrases that people just simply don't understand. So there's that coming up. There is a increasingly diversity fatigue, where chief diversity officers are just saying, I'm tired. And so there's turnover, and then also the people who keep talking about the fact that most chief diversity officers are black. Hello, that's not true. Most chief diversity officers are white women because they are in HR, which is populated heavily by white women. That's not a critique of white women. So before anyone starts getting on that, it's not a critique of white women at all. It's a reality relative to the numbers. So, stop this notion. And then this thing about the power to change. And I talk to diversity officers all the time, and they're talking about a seat at the table. I'll say, let me say this to you. When you have that seat at the table, you better have something to say. And that something to say should be linking diversity to the success of the business. All of this, there's still this thing about, well, that person has to manage the ERGs. ERGs are very helpful in terms of getting data. The question is, what do you do with that data? And I just don't, diversity officers are telling me that they don't know. And also, from a quantitative standpoint, there isn't anything significantly available that states that.
Yeah, I have concern about people who have the title VP of Diversity and
Mm.
Inclusion, CDO,
Yeah,
Senior VP of
mm,
DEI and Culture,
yeah,
who don't understand some of the things or who are not operating in a way that you are describing. So,
correct.
like so many other things before, the title gets used, but
Yes,
the qualifications
correct,
do not align with what the role needs to be doing.
correct.
So when you
Absolutely.
talk to leaders in organizations, okay, I mean, so maybe you're like me. If I walk into an organization and the person I'm talking to is the chief diversity officer, like, okay, you're the person I'm working with, but I can see that there are some deficiencies that they may not even realize are affecting their effectiveness.
Correct.
What do you do to still get the most out of? Like, how do you coach people to, or organizations, leaders and organizations, to think about again what you're going to measure?
Yeah. So what I generally do, first of all, is with that person, I'll say, well, let's sit down and talk. I will show them a model that I have in terms of what that role is supposed to look like. And then I'm going to say, from this model, where do you need help? How can I help you? I'll show the same model to the leader who is responsible for diversity. And I found that, quite frankly, to be very, very effective, because they're operating off of one model. And then at some point, I bring them together. I don't bring them together initially. And the reason I don't bring them together initially is, frankly, in too many organizations, the trust factor is not there. But having to work on the model, then from an evaluation standpoint, they can use that as putting the aspects of the model and achieving measurement and all of those kinds of things into the performance evaluation.
Yeah, that's good. And you're right. It would be fascinating, I think, to ask two different people, like,
Yes,
you're in the job, where do you feel I
right.
can support you or that there are gaps? But then to ask the CEO or the COO, right,
Hmm.
where do you see the gaps are and what do you want to focus on? And if they don't match, like, that makes for a very rich conversation.
And 98% of the time, based on my experience, they don't match. They're not even close. They're just not even close.
I recently was in a conversation with someone who is the VP of DEI in their organization, and they actually understand what needs to happen.
Hmm.
They actually understand that this can be integral to the business and can make a huge impact.
Yes.
But a they have people in the C-suite, everybody else in the C-suite has no clue and is
None.
resistant. So
Hmm.
what advice do you have? You've already mentioned you've got to be able to speak the business, but what advice do you have for people who are leading inclusion initiatives and how they educate and bring along their peers or superiors?
Yeah. So that there are two parts to that. First, whenever I am doing this work, part of my conversation is with the entire C-suite around what their expectations for the role are. So I do that. But what I specifically tell the chief diversity officer is ensuring that you have a champion who can speak for you when you're not in the room. And that is one of the things that, you know, chief diversity officers have difficulty getting and getting done. So that's one of the ways that I do that, and I found that to be um, among the most effective ways is encouraging these champions. And in fact, people were champions who uh, were not asked to be champions before, even though that they wanted to be. But this is the role of the chief diversity officer to get to know his or her colleagues and to figure out, well, who is going to be the champion. What I say to them is, you can't just say, be my champion because diversity is important. Give them facts, give them figures, give them expectations.
I just want people to take a breath and take that in, because we have to move beyond the like philosophical
Yes,
and be able to speak in the financial,
yes,
and where get people to where they can answer the question, what's in it for me, not me personally, and me as a leader of a division, or me
yes.
as the leader of a hospital. Like if I can't get you to internalize it in that way, then you're always turning to me, the
Yes.
CDO, as if I am the person who's going to make the magic happen.
And in a lot of cases, I simply don't have that kind of power in an organization. And so, let's figure out who can help build that. And that's what I encourage them to do. And I found that to be, quite frankly, very effective.
Yes. Yes. If the people who are being paid to guide and lead the journey to inclusion could just understand, you're the guide, you're the leader. You are yourself are not the journey.
Correct.
And so if there's you may have heard this talk. I won't talk about the whole talk, but when there were some young people, some children who were doing assigned to do a talk in response to the Martin Luther King drum major
Ah,
speech. And so this young man who won the contest, he basically had a line in his talk like, if you are a leader, but there's nobody behind you, then you're just a drum major out on the field dancing and looking like a fool.
and he's right. He is absolutely right. Same method, same philosophy. 100% correct on that.
Yeah. So I do recognize a couple of things. One, we only have you for a short period of time because your calendar is crazy.
Yeah, it is.
And so I do want to just tap into anything else that comes to mind for you related to measuring progress. And I'm especially wanting, I don't know, for whatever reason, what's in my mind is so often when people are talking about inclusion initiatives, they still are race and gender. Well, we know that inclusion is inclusion of everybody, and that is, sure, we have labels of people with disabilities, or we have labels that based on gender identity and expression, or sexual orientation, or religion, or right, we could start naming specifics. But is there anything that comes to mind around measuring or setting up your programs so that people in your association or organization can begin to
Yeah.
recognize beyond just race and gender.
Yeah, I think the first thing is the organization has to have a clear definition of what DEI is in the organization. I think that's number one. Race and gender, okay, fine, we get that. But the other factors, neurodiversity is something that simply isn't discussed because they're like, well, we're not very comfortable with that. Organizations need to become much more comfortable with neurodiversity. I think that's one of the measurement areas that's very, very important. Psychological safety, I think, is very important as well. I also think that we look at the broad spectrum of diversity, and I keep saying diversity does not exclude people without melanated skin. I mean, it just, and I think that conversation needs to happen. So that's one of the measures that we need to be able to do. I also think that from a measurement standpoint, as you're designing measures, you need to talk to your ERGs to figure out what's really going on in the atmosphere. I think that's the other aspect as well. And again, these measures have to be both quantitative and qualitative, and they can't just be the smile test. I feel comfortable at work. Those are not measures. Those are emotional reactions, which lead to nothing.
Love that. And I just had to go off camera for a minute because, we're doing live
Yes.
and my yard folks just showed up.
Oh, of course.
So I'm
Isn't
hearing,
that always? Yeah, that's when it happens. Other than that, you're like, why is my grass so high? And you're doing a live and then, hey,
I'm hearing lawnmowers and edgers. And so,
yeah,
yeah, I needed to close the door. But what it makes me think of is that as DEI professionals, we are like trained to pivot,
yeah,
right?
pivot.
We don't know what people are going to say. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know when there's some emergency that we need to get called away to pay attention to.
Yeah,
And so I was laughing as I was coming back to my seat going, yeah, this is the life of a DEI professional.
every day, like my grandmother would say, every day, all day long.
Well, is there anything else that you want to share with this audience, people who are really committed to working on creating more inclusion in their workplace, in the places they worship, in the community at large, and in their own lives?
I think we've covered it. I would encourage folks, if they'd like to take a look at my LinkedIn page where I provide constant updates on the research that I'm doing, the practical application. And then also, I think at some point, Tracy, you and I should continue an extended conversation to be able to share with your folks. I'll be more than happy to do that as well.
Well, we absolutely will make that happen. And I cannot emphasize enough what Dr. Metzler just said. Follow him on LinkedIn. It will be a benefit to you if you are interested in understanding more about what you can do and what's happening in this umbrella called DEIB. Thank you, Dr. Metzler. I'm
My
so
pleasure.
grateful.
Thank you. Take care.
And everybody, I just want to encourage you to stay tuned and to dive in to the other sessions that are remaining in the Achieving Inclusion Summit. And don't forget, you can watch all of the previous sessions by going to any of the places that we are streaming. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am grateful that you have been with us today.